They may be logical, but they sure are sneaky. I'm Mike with List25, and here are 25 crafty fallacies to trick the eyes and boggle the mind. But before we get started, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. With that being said, let's go. 25. Straw man. You may have seen this expression used on social media related to political ideas and conspiracy theories. But what does it mean? A straw man argument is when someone twists the point you're making to gain an advantage. The name reflects this. A man made of straw is weak and flimsy, and you can knock it over in seconds. A famous example is used by Richard Nixon in 1952. He faced accusations of financial wrongdoing when running for vice president, and he deflected attention by talking about his dog. Checkers was a black and white Cocker Spaniel puppy who'd been given to Nixon's family by a business associate. The cute puppy was actually part of Nixon's dodgy dealings, but he managed to flip the conversation by focusing on the angle of a beloved pet. It worked, and Nixon was elected, thanks in part to Checkers. 24. Ad hominem. Ad hominem is Latin for argument to the person, and means resorting to personal attacks rather than engaging with the substance of what your opponent is saying. It's something else you see in a lot of political discussions, typically when pointing out so-called hypocrisy. Environmentalists are often derailed when it turns out they don't practice what they preach. Stuff like they hate air pollution but travel by private jet. By criticizing their life choices, you aren't denying the threat of air pollution, but you're shifting the focus and getting the audience to think about the person and not the issue. It isn't logical, but it's effective. 23. Circular reasoning. What's wrong with this statement? This celebrity is famous for being famous. Well, the statement goes in a circle, assuming it's correct without establishing the facts. Let's go a little deeper with this concept, known as circular reasoning. How do we know that person is a celebrity? Because the statement is telling us so. It completely relies on an opinion, not a proven fact. How did they become famous in the first place? What things have they done to stay famous? We don't hear that. Only the smallest amount of information with precious little logic. What logic there is creates a loop, giving the impression that you've heard a fact when you haven't. It's the equivalent of saying something is good because it just is. 22. False dilemma. Let me know if this sounds familiar to you. You're either with us or against us. Who's ever saying that could be offering you a false choice, as in a logical fallacy called a false dilemma. Also known as a black or white fallacy, it takes a complex question and tries to turn it into an either-or situation. Life isn't always black and white like that. You need to look at every angle, such as what's in the middle ground. However, it doesn't stop false dilemmas from having mass appeal. They sound inspiring and make everything look easier than it should be. Another sneaky thing about this fallacy is it plays on the way people already think. We tend to look at everyday things in binary terms. For example, it's common to make a mistake and then think you're some kind of jinx who will keep screwing things up. Black or white fallacies are super appealing to many of us for that reason. Now, I should add that some situations are actually black and white, but you can't apply this reasoning to all situations. 21. Appeal to authority. When is an expert not an expert? When they say they're an expert and they're not. This is what's at the heart of the appeal to authority fallacy. You see it a lot these days in videos where celebrities endorse points of view or products and are presented as knowledgeable about the subject. Things become even more complicated with the use of deepfakes, creating a totally fictional version of a celeb to promote misinformation. It isn't just actors and pop stars mixed up in these appeals. You'd listen closely to a doctor speaking about a medical topic, wouldn't you? However, be careful, as this doctor might have a certificate in pet care and not human health. 20. Post hoc. The full name for this logical fallacy is post hoc ergo propter hoc, which translates as after this, therefore because of this. It's the idea that an event happens because of something that preceded it. This may be true in some cases. Someone can burn their hand on the oven because they didn't follow someone's advice to wear oven mitts. With the post hoc fallacy, you take a less logical approach. Did the hamburger you ate last night really give you a stomachache this morning, or are you just assuming that? You'll also find cases of post hoc fallacy in the sporting world, with athletes relying on items such as lucky shirts. They figure if they don't wear the shirt, they'll lose the game. 19. Hasty Generalization. Teenagers are so disrespectful these days, aren't they? Or maybe you've just had some bad experiences with teens and reached a misguided conclusion. When someone does something like this, they're making a hasty generalization. This powerful fallacy extends from people to food. Let's say there's a dish you don't like. Now, do you find the dish unpleasant because of how it tastes, or because you tried a certain brand and it just wasn't for you? Maybe if you tasted another brand, you might love it. Beating the hasty generalization fallacy involves broadening your horizons and not rushing to have an opinion on things. Otherwise, it'll sneak up on you time and again. 18. Slippery slope. This next fallacy is pretty sneaky because it uses small facts to generate big problems. The slippery slope fallacy takes a situation and makes it unnecessarily dramatic. You might have had a response like that when seeing what the government's doing in the news. No one likes the idea of authorities having access to your personal data, so you could see a move to collect even more information as a part of a slippery slope. At the top of the slope is a simple request to provide personal details. At the bottom of the slope is a police state where everyone's microchipped and you can't walk your dog without asking permission. You've gone from 0 to 60 concerns-wise in a short period of time. That is the slippery slope effect. Now, some are worth sliding down, but many are illogical. 17. Bandwagon. Jumping on the bandwagon is a long-established saying, and there's also a fallacy that feeds into that. The bandwagon, or appeal to popularity fallacy, sees people behaving in a herd-like way. They make decisions about their lives based on what others are doing. From business investments to fad diets, the idea looks like a good one. However, not all companies or products are reliable, and you can't underestimate the power of marketing. A famous example is the classic McDonald's slogan, "Billions and billions served." This naturally draws customers into the restaurant. But how many of those people swore to never eat McDonald's again? Big numbers are not an automatic guarantee of quality. 16. Red herring. Red herrings, or misdirections, are a major part of movie thrillers, but they're also helpful in the sneaky world of fallacies. So, how do they work? Crafty characters use this fishy fallacy to distract and engage an audience. A famous story involves former President Reagan, who in 1984 asked a question about his political challenger, Walter Mondale. Mondale was around 20 years younger than Reagan, and the reporter wanted to play on that age gap, suggesting Reagan could be too old. However, Reagan turned it around by saying he was going to, quote, exploit Mondale's youth and inexperience. He moved seamlessly from one subject to the other, with many people not realizing he'd taken the attention away from his advancing years. 15. Appeal to emotion. Giving to charity is a great thing. However, sometimes pressure has to be applied to make sure people donate. That's where the appeal to emotion fallacy comes in. This can be created if someone makes a statement like, "Donate to our animal charity or these poor creatures will die." It puts the emphasis on the donor, making them feel as if they're personally responsible for the animal's plight. They experience anger over the injustice of the situation and guilt they aren't doing more to help. Charity becomes an emotional roller coaster, carrying people along for the ride. Appealing to people on an emotional level rather than a logical one has proved highly effective for groups wanting to raise money and awareness fast. The fallacy fills your heart, but be careful as it may also empty your wallet. 14. Burden of proof. What's a sneaky way of getting around providing evidence for stuff you say? Well, the burden of proof fallacy offers an easy path to superiority and smugness. All you have to do is make a statement, then when someone challenges it, you tell them to disprove what you said. Hopefully they'll be distracted by the burden of proof and not work out that you didn't really have any proof of your own. Philosopher Bertrand Russell wanted to overcome the obstacle of the burden proof of fallacy. He suggested the idea of a teapot floating in space between Earth and Mars. Russell wanted this strange example to illustrate how people could get away with making big statements without evidence, such as saying God exists. He believed the burden fell on the religious person and not the person questioning their faith. Russell's teapot is an enduring thought experiment that's still used today. 13. False equivalence. Comparing two similar objects can be helpful when explaining ideas, but not when you're using the fallacy of false equivalence. This fallacy can be heard a lot when people are arguing. In debates about drugs, someone might compare marijuana to cocaine due to the fact that taking one drug might lead the user to seek bigger highs. That happens, but it doesn't mean the two substances are the same. What about those who consume marijuana for legitimate medical reasons and don't move on to Class A drugs? Plus, the effects of each drug are different. It definitely grabs people's attention when you make a false equivalence, however, it's still a flimsy premise to base an argument on. 12. Too Fallacy. There is nothing like throwing a subject back into someone's face to beat them in an argument. Tu quoque is Latin for you too, and it's great for pointing out hypocrisy in your opponent. This can be a pain for any parent who may have spent their childhood misbehaving. If their kid hears about it, they can deploy the you too fallacy and sink your authority. There's no point in telling someone to stop talking back to their teacher when you did that yourself. It's a powerful fallacy, but also an illogical one. The fact is, you need to behave in school so you can focus and learn. Whether your parent was a wild child or not is beside the point. The principle still stands. 11. Composition fallacy. Composition fallacy is deceptive in that it seems to be logical when it's not. Take food, for example. Eating healthy is good for you, but if you think eating a lot of healthy food in one meal is doing you a favor, then you need to think again. Overdoing it with any kind of food is potentially risking your health. How about building materials? If the individual bricks that go into making a house weigh virtually nothing, then technically you'd be okay if the house fell on you, right? Wrong. It doesn't follow that a bunch of light stuff together would all be the same weight. This illogical approach is what leads to the composition fallacy. It's easily thought of, but ultimately incorrect. 10. Division. A division fallacy is the bizarro version of the composition fallacy. Instead of looking at an object in terms of its parts, this fallacy looks at it in terms of the whole. Let me explain kind of what I mean here by using a visual aid. I'm thinking of a garage where cars are serviced. The garage is 120 feet high and 60 feet wide. The garage next door is half that size, so according to the division fallacy, the cars in that garage would have to be half that size too, right? See what I mean? It's pretty illogical. Another example is a sports team. Are the players in the world's greatest baseball team the greatest athletes in the world? Not really. It would be impossible to gather such a group of people in one place at the same time. 9. Appeal to tradition. The old ways are the best. It's a classic expression, but is it the correct one? While tried and tested methods can have an edge over new ideas, that isn't always the case. The appeal to tradition is a fallacy promoting misinformation about stuff that's been around a long time. Long-standing tradition replaces logical thinking, helping the fallacy to mislead you. You hear it a lot in the field of medicine and the age-old question of traditional remedies versus modern treatments. Logic dictates the most effective medicine is the best one, yet some people stick to what they know, even if it isn't as effective. 8. No True Scotsman. Patriotic people can fall prey to the simplest logical fallacies. The No True Scotsman fallacy was inspired by, you've guessed it, Bonnie Scotland. No Scotsman puts sugar in his porridge is a familiar expression someone from there might say. Proud Scottish people may think a bowl of porridge should be sugar-free, but we all know porridge should be eaten with sugar, fruit, and various accompaniments. However, some Scots don't want to hear that, replying with, no true Scotsman puts sugar in his porridge. They're prepared to contradict their own idea, saying a Scottish porridge fan is lacking in Scottishness for not sticking to the routine. Now, the fallacy isn't only used in relation to Scotland. Many examples can be a no true Scotsman fallacy, provided they follow the basic pattern. You start with a broad generalization, someone contradicts you, then you stretch the concept to fit your story. 7. Genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy involves rushing to a conclusion for a pretty illogical reason. Would you say a book is no good because the author is unpopular? That assumes the writer is incapable of writing a decent story if they have a bad reputation. Here's another question. Is a medical treatment from thousands of years ago still valid? With the genetic fallacy, you'd say no due to the fact that it's majorly outdated. But hang on. Why would its age rule it out as a treatment? That simply isn't true in some cases. After all, we wouldn't have modern medicine without the pioneers in ancient times. From political websites to racial stereotypes, mistrusting things based on their origin can be wrong-headed. If something is right, it's right, and where it came from shouldn't come into it. 6. Anecdotal fallacy. You can't judge something based entirely on personal experience. That's the core of the anecdotal fallacy. Each person has a different view on a subject, but those views are subjective and influenced by stuff like emotions. I'm going to focus on bananas as an example. Now, people don't get emotional about bananas. However, there are opinions floating around regarding their health benefits based on no objective evidence. Ever heard of the bananidine compound? It dates back to the 60s, and a story that a special compound enabled you to get high whilst smoking banana skins. Yeah, you heard me right. Needless to say, bananidine doesn't exist, but there were many who believed in it. The anecdote spread and a mass delusion took hold of people who were relying solely on personal opinion and not scientific fact. 5. Appeal to ignorance. Do you believe there's life on other planets? Maybe you do, and maybe you find there being no proof to the contrary a deciding factor. People haven't proved it, but they haven't disproved it either, so it's probably a thing. The appeal to ignorance fallacy reflects that view. Whatever the reasoning, it's clear there's no concrete evidence for both those arguments. The appeal to ignorance is a lot like the burden of proof fallacy, where the onus is placed on the person who's responding to unsubstantiated claims rather than the person who made the claim in the first place. Only what this fallacy does is spell things out more directly. You're effectively using ignorance as a defense, and that's not cool. 4. Cherry picking. The cherry picking fallacy is an eye-catching alternative name for the suppressed evidence fallacy. You see this one in advertising, where companies accentuate the positives and eliminate the negatives, as the old song goes. They don't totally remove the negative material, however, they are very selective when choosing what information to give consumers. Cherry-picking stats so the upbeat stuff stands out makes good business sense. A classic example is saying something like 95% of consumers love a product. That sounds impressive. But what they're not telling you is that the survey used to get that result only talked to a small number of people. 3. Garden of forking paths. Analyzing data isn't as straightforward as it looks. There are different paths you can explore whilst crunching those numbers, but it doesn't mean that people doing the research always follow the correct one. The garden of forking paths fallacy takes inspiration from an open space, which can branch out all over the place. A researcher has to choose which direction to go in, and this may lead to false positives due to them having to select a path rather than spending time analyzing every possible outcome. Now, I'm not saying good work hasn't come out of this. Ultimately, scientists are subject to limitations like any other kind of work. It's just interesting to learn stuff which seems logical can also be illogical in some ways. 2. Gambler's fallacy. The philosophy of gambling is based upon logical fallacies, such as the gambler's fallacy. This takes everyday stuff and treats it like it's a bet being made at a roulette table. For example, the birth of a child. If a mother has given birth to a baby boy, then another baby boy, the gambler, may assume the next child will be a girl. There's no logical basis for this. They just have a feeling. This particularly applies if the father is determined to have a son and hopes that by trying again and again, the likelihood of seeing a boy will increase. The fallacy was actually first written about in 1820, where families were more focused on things like having sons instead of daughters. Of course, using gambling methods to get through life isn't recommended at all. It's tempting to think luck might go your way, but this stuff isn't really down to you. 1. Fallacy of Exclusion. Context is super important when judging someone or something. You need to know the whole story before jumping in and accusing a person of being lazy, or worse, being a criminal. People can get things very wrong making those assumptions, and this is because of the fallacy of exclusion. You exclude certain facts and highlight ones that suit your argument. One popular example is the old view that cities are dangerous because there's more crime there. This excludes the fact that cities have higher concentrations of people, so of course you're going to see more stuff like crime. Plus, it would be entirely possible for a city to be safe if it were run a certain way. A city isn't dangerous simply because it's a city. Try not to exclude vital context when getting into those back and forth arguments. Hopefully now you'll be mindful of those sneaky logical fallacies. But let's see what you learned by testing you with a final question. How did Coca-Cola use the bandwagon fallacy as part of their Share a Coke campaign? Did they A, say drinking it brought you good luck, B, put popular first names on the bottle, C, say not drinking it made your hair fall out, or D, make bottles you could eat afterwards? Let us know your answers in the comments below. And if you're feeling unsettled by this video, well, then prepare to be even more confused by the next one. Things that are perfectly legal but feel criminal are waiting for you right here. Thank you guys so much. As always, like, share, comment, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll catch you again next time. See ya.